business owners or commercial property owners do we have in the audience today? Versus owner occupied residential.
I used to own building that town for about 30 years.
Okay,
In the historic district.
what about now? No longer?
They don't want anything except my car.
Okay, well, at least you got that. So I don't have any tax credits for cars though.
Oh, dear.
So our office, the State Historic Preservation Office, is part of DNR. It wasn't always that case. Actually, it started with DNR when it was Department of Conservation, then it was an independent agency, now we're back with DNR. And within that office, we have several divisions, each dealing with sort of different aspects of historic preservation. There's the National Register of Historic Places. I don't work in that division. There's archaeology. I don't work in that division either. There's certified local government. I don't do that either. Then there's financial incentives and architecture. This is where I work. But all of these programs kind of overlap and touch each other. So for example, incentives are available to historic properties, and those are by and large properties that are listed on the National Register. So that's why I'm here today, because you have this quite large National Register historic of historic places district. I don't know if you can read that, but that's not us. A lot of people think that we have this power or this kind of role, but we don't. We actually encourage people to do the right thing with their historic resources and historic buildings, but we're not preservation police. We don't have the power to stop projects from occurring or from bad things to happen to historic buildings. If there is such a thing, it exists locally. So that is done through local ordinances, local designation, and local communities can sort of greater influence what happens with their historic resources rather than our agency. But that's a common misconception. So just as a show of a quick audience poll, I like to do this when visiting historic towns. We mentioned your local or your National Register district, which was designated in 1978. So I'm using numbers from 1978. There may not be as many now, but at the time it included 211 buildings. 186 of them were contributing, meaning they contribute to the historic significance of the district. So they would have been considered historic, and 25 were not. So how many of these projects do you think, or how many of these buildings would have to meet Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which are standards that we use to review building alterations for their appropriateness? So how many people think that all of the buildings in the historic district, regardless of their designation, would have to follow those guidelines or must follow those guidelines? Nobody? Okay. The 186 historic ones? Okay. The non-historic ones? None? Okay. It's a trick question because I said they must follow, and none of them must follow them. Because the mere designation on the historic register on the National Register of Historic Places doesn't impose any restrictions on property owners, none whatsoever. It's only those projects that receive state or federal funding, licensing, or permitting that require a review by our office for the compliance of those standards. And so that's the trigger. And only as part of that review, we would figure out if historic properties are affected. And those triggers are funds or grants, incentives, like the ones that we're going to be talking about today, licenses. So for example, a new branch, a bank branch opening up in anywhere, or permits for, we review a lot of FCC antenna installations, things like that. IDOT projects for road widening, you know, because those are state actions, things like that. But roughly, I forget what the numbers are, but it's in the thousands of projects that receive that some kind of state or federal fingerprint that come through our office, but very small percentage of those projects are actually affecting historic resources.
Quick question,
Yes.
going back and tying them together. You've got the contributing buildings, which are the primary ones with respect to the review. To what extent are you incorporating things like viewscape so that you, with regard to non-contributing and such, so that you blend your two slides together?
Oh, yeah, I mean, there are, it's not that we only would review things to contributing resources. Anything that happens in the district, if we're reviewing it, may need to be compatible with the historic character of the district. So for example, changes like a new building being built would be reviewed for its quote unquote compatibility with the historic character of the area. So we do review, again, when we review something, we do consider a project's impact on nearby historic resources, not just on direct impacts to the historic resources themselves. Is that what you were
Yes.
getting at? Okay. Welcome. You didn't miss much here. So tax credits are a big part of the presentation, but it sounds like we don't actually have a lot of commercial property owners, but so I'll maybe fast track that discussion. But I realize this will also be available for others to view later. So it's probably good to go over because you have quite a bit of commercial properties, and these tax credits can be leveraged as a way to finance these projects. The way tax credits generally work is that they offset your income tax credit liability. So if it's a federal credit, or offsets your federal income tax credit liability, state applies to the state tax credit. And it's usually worth a percentage of the renovation costs. So the 20% federal tax credit is exactly that. It's 20% of the final qualified renovation costs will be the amount of the credits that the owner is eligible for. And I don't know how many CPAs we have in the audience, but you can, of course, as a business, take a deduction, but you can't do both, right? So it's a principle of denial of double benefit. You can either take a credit or you can either use a deduction. I'm not a CPA and I'm not about to advise people on their personal financial situations. General wisdom is a credit is better, but of course a deduction, if it puts you on a different tax bracket, may be better for you. So, but what we have seen is tax credits be a pretty powerful incentive in Illinois since it was created at the federal level in the early 80s. So we'll talk about these three incentives. There is a fourth, but it's not available to you, so I'm not going to tease you with it. So, and each of these incentives, the requirements can be broken down into four broad criteria. There is the significance, use, budget, and work, and we'll go over each. So under the federal credit, it applies to certified historic buildings. We'll go over what that is. Commercial income producing properties after the rehabilitation. It doesn't matter what it was originally or historically. You have to have a substantial rehabilitation. So there's an expenditure test we'll cover. And then the work must meet the standards with a capital S. It's those standards for rehabilitation that I already mentioned. So what is a certified historic building for the purposes of the tax credit? It is either a building individually listed on the National Register or a contributing building within a National Register listed district or a local district that has been certified by the National Park Service. It's a It's a pretty obscure type of designation. We have quite a few number of those in Illinois, but for the purposes of Lebanon, it's the 186 contributing buildings. Do we know if that number has changed? Have we, what's our attrition rate? Yes,
Got a little comments.
okay, okay, gotcha. But it's still quite a few. Yes, good. So you have one National Register building individually listed, the Mermaid House Hotel, which is also a contributing building within your large district. But those are the buildings that are eligible for, actually for all the incentives that we're going to be talking about today. And here's a map of that district, and you were given a map earlier. If you need one, you can find yourself in a district. Like, sure. But this is from the 1978 listing. So what it actually also does beyond your map is it classifies each building as, now they didn't in 1978, they didn't use the same terms as we do today. So now we have two categories: contributing, historic, non-contributing, non-historic. Back then, you could see all of the different keys on the map. It was buildings of special significance, other buildings of special significance, buildings cited in a survey, other sympathetic historic buildings or old buildings, and then non-sympathetic or intrusions and those kinds of things. So, but between those two categories, we've come up with 186 historic and 25 now. So again, the tax credit is available for commercial property, anything that's income producing now, not historically. So we have had, for example, churches that were converted into breweries. So it's that use post rehabilitation that's important, that enables the incentive. You have to spend some money in order to qualify. Now that changes for each property. The threshold that's required is, oh, glad we're inside. Is the adjusted basis of the value, adjusted basis value of the building, or $5,000, whichever is greater. It's basically the current sort of depreciated commercial value of the property. So we have a little formula here, but basically it's your purchase price minus land value, minus depreciation, plus capital improvements that you've made over the years. So for a building that is just purchased, that's pretty easy to figure out, and most people just use the purchase price to figure out if, am I going to spend that? Okay, then I can pursue this. But your accountant needs to know this number to do your taxes year to year. And yes.
I have a question. City has sales tax money collected in the business district that can be given to businesses what improves. How would that money apply? Consider the $5,000 from the city. Would that apply to this?
So that would apply to justify your trigger, but you can't get the credit of it. So it's money being spent on the building. Right. So if you need to demonstrate that you've spent enough and it could put you over the hump, sure. But that would be double dipping, getting a credit on money that you received that isn't yours. So it would, and then the qualified, disqualified costs. So not everything qualifies for the credit, but almost everything. So purchase price doesn't. Not all soft costs do, but some do. So operational expenses during construction, architectural engineering fees, developer fees, things like that. And then in terms of hard costs, it's anything within the footprint volume, I should say, of the existing building, including work to non-historic but existing additions. Now, if you were to construct a new addition, we would have to review that work for its compatibility on the historic building, but the costs of that new addition would not be eligible for the credit. Hope that makes sense. And if it doesn't, blame the IRS, not me. And so everything that I've talked about up to this point is just sort of admin stuff. What I do all day is this, is review those changes that are made to buildings to make sure that those rehabilitation standards are followed. And rehabilitation is underlined for a reason. There are different sets of federally enabled standards for treatment of historic properties. There are restoration standards, which are pretty restrictive because they demand that you restore a building to a specific point in time. So in our discussions with some earlier with folks, for example, window restoration or replacement under restoration standard would require that you put single pane windows, because that's what they were. We don't do that under rehabilitation standards. We acknowledge that certain modern conveniences, amenities, and efficiency improvements are necessary. And so in the window example, if we agree that a historic window is beyond repair, because we would still want you to try to repair it. But if the next step is replacement, then an insulated glass window would meet rehabilitation standards. And then we would still work with you to make sure that, you know, as the proper mounting grid to look like the old one. And so the other thing about rehabilitation standards is it doesn't, again, require you to put something back that is missing already. So you're not responsible for choices, decisions, changes made by previous owners. The starting point is what it is before the project. So at the starting. So if something's already been altered and has been robbed of its historic character, well, then our review is going to be pretty easy because there's not that much for us to care about. We'll focus on those features, elements, facades that are primary. So on exteriors of buildings, street facing elevations, backs of buildings that face alleyways or are landlocked don't matter so much. On the interior, it would be the primary public spaces. So let's take a home, for example, because we have a lot of homeowners. So it would be your vestibule, foyer, stair hall, dining room, living room, upper stair hall, bedrooms, maybe if they have fireplaces and some, you know, sort of nicer features. Kitchens, bathrooms, unfinished attics and basement, do whatever you want. And still get the benefit, the financial benefit. But every building's different and every existing condition for a building is different. And so, you know, I don't have a checklist for everybody. This is why we want you to contact us. We walk through the building to sort of identify the sticking points. This is okay to change. This is not. What should we do next? So on and so forth. So that consultation, while it's not required, you could do a project and then apply for this after the fact. But if you've done something that we can't approve, then we can't have a different set of standards because you decided, or that'll sound mean, because you decided to call us after the fact, because you didn't know that we existed and you did the work without consulting with us. But that would be a double standard. So, I work for the government, so there are forms involved. So, and these aren't even our forms; these are the National Park Services forms. So this incentive is at a federal level; it's a federal incentive. So there's actually another level of review after us. That's the ultimate review. We actually just make a recommendation to the Park Service, but they agree with us most of the time. So we have a good feeling, you know, when a project is forwarded to the National Park Service, we can generally tell if it's going to be approved or not. But there are three parts to the application. You know, is it historic? So contributing in a district. What are you going to do? This is the documenting existing conditions and then showing us through photographs what those are and then describing the work that you're going to do. And then after you're done, you submit another set of photographs to show that you did the project as you've proposed or as it was approved. So we like to do site visits when we can. Again, just because it's easier to review a project, and pictures sometimes don't capture the complexity or the condition of a particular resource. It's, a window may look fine, in a photo, but up close, it really looks like it needs to be replaced, right? So we do like to do that in person. And as I mentioned, we'll review those application parts, forward them on to the National Park Service. You can then do the work. This is ideally, right? And then once you're done, you submit the last piece of the application, and then you can get your credit after that. And actually, you can claim the credit all along, but to get into that, there are all sorts of different loopholes. There's a possibility of structuring your projects in phases. So if your project is gonna take years to complete, and that credit would be really useful along the way, then you can set it up as a phase, and after you complete each phase, we can approve that phase, and then until you complete them all, or you decide that you're done and you're no longer going to complete phases 4 and 5 because you ran out of money or something. So there is some flexibility in the process to accommodate those kinds of things. Additional provisions. There is no review fee that we charge, so you already pay my salary through taxes, so I'm here. And I will be here as many times as you ask me to be here. The National Park Service does charge a review fee for projects of a certain size. It's sort of this weird calculus of, projects between 845 and 6,500. Oh, that's the amount of fee for projects $80,000 and above. But basically, the most you pay is 6,500 for a review fee, and that's a project over $3.5 million in size. And then after that, the fee doesn't increase anymore. It stays at 6,500. The credits can't be claimed all at once. That's a change that was made some time ago. And it was kind of a hit to the development community. And it has negatively affected projects. The Treasury or the federal government wants you to spread out the use of the credits for at least over a period of 5 years. There are efforts to change that. I don't know if they would be successful. And there's also a recapture period of 5 years. So you can't, it's not that you can't, but you shouldn't sell your building immediately after completing the project and claiming the credit. If you do, you'll have to pay back the credit. And it's a prorated sort of portion that you pay back depending on when you dispose of the property within that 5-year period. But after 5 years, no other strings attached. If you wanted to, you could demolish your brand new rehab building. I don't know why you do that, but again, listing on the register doesn't prevent you from doing anything. So we have a hook for 5 years, but after that, we don't. Can you flip a property again? No, you have to retain that ownership for 5 years, which is different for the freeze, which I'll talk about next. Now, credits can be syndicated. Syndication is a pretty complex but great legal way to accept investors into a limited partnership to help you finance your project. Basically, the way it works, and I already mentioned it to a couple of people. Let's say let's say Charlie the mayor has a building. He has a historic building and he wants to renovate it. He knows what he wants to do, but he doesn't have the funds to do it. Sounds right, right? I have the money and I could use some tax credits because my tax liability is off the charts. So anything to help me offset it. So we go into a partnership. And I'll provide equity into his project in exchange for the credits. And then after a certain point in time, after that 5-year recapture period, I exit the partnership and he's once again the 100% owner of the property. This process is called syndication, and it's a fantastic tool for large projects to finance their redevelopment. The reason why it only tends to work for larger projects because the legal cost fees to set up this entity structure is regardless of cost the same regardless of how big your project are. So small projects just can't absorb that cost. It's just not worth it. And so that cutoff historically tends to be around $4 to $5 million in renovation costs. We have seen some smaller projects been able to do that, but it's uncommon. So, hello. Welcome. So that's the federal credit. We have a sort of a companion state tax credit. Any questions about the federal credit before we move on? How are we doing on time? Good? Everybody falling asleep yet? Not yet. Okay, not yet is the key. Yeah. Okay. So we have a companion state tax credit of 25% that you can pair with the federal. But there are caveats. So the federal credit is a by right credit, meaning you meet those 4 criteria: significance, budget, work, and use. You'll get the credit. The state credit, you have to meet additional criteria, and that's because we have a limited amount of funds that the legislature gives us annually to allocate to projects. So we have a program currently that expires at the end of 2028. It's, again, same definitions as the historic tax credit, but but it's a 25% credit, and the most you can get per project is 3 million in credits. So that would mean a project of 12 million or under would get a full 25% credit. That's pretty big. And we have 25 million of allocations per year. So we split that. We have 2 rounds. And actually the second round of this year is coming up. I'll have some dates here if you wanted to attend to learn more about how that program works. So again, we don't duplicate the design review of the federal credit in order to figure out if your project qualifies. In fact, it's a requirement you go through the federal review and obtain the Part 2 approval. Your scope of work must be approved before you apply for this. But then we shepherd it through the process to figure out how an allocation process to figure out who amongst all of these people that are applying can actually get this credit. Additional provisions are that, well, because it's a limited program, so your expenses have to be incurred from 1/1/19 to 12/31/28. There is a third-party CPA that has to certify the costs at the end. There is an issuance fee for the credit, which is 2% of the credit amount. And the credit can be carried forward for 10 years, which in contrast to the federal, which can be carried forward 20. So who gets these allocations? So there's a set of 5 priorities that the legislature has created for us. We were not involved in drafting this legislation, so this is what we have. The more of these you meet, the better. So projects with 5 priorities are going to be competing with other 5 priority projects to get an allocation. And if they eat up the 25 million, then no one else is going to get it. So priorities are key. And these priorities are, we're not going to get into each in detail, but you have to be in a border county and bordering states that have a competitive credit. So the legislature created this priority thinking that we see development being taken away from Illinois from competing from other states. For example, in the Quad Cities where there's a very robust state historic tax credit programs. Developer is gonna work in Davenport and not in Rock Island. You know, if the costs are the same, rehab costs, but they can get a better incentive across the river, they're gonna stay there or go there, right? So let's give those projects, those counties a priority so they can try to achieve this credit. Former government ownership, so any unit of state, local or federal ownership would, for a period of 6 months during the life of the building, would give it another priority. Family, median family income at or below the state median family income as defined by the American Community Survey. 5-year estimates from the US Census Bureau gives it another priority. So certain census tracts and those change annually. There is a development partnership priority for admitting nonprofits and low profit entities. So if you have such partners in your project, you can get that priority. And then lastly, projects located in federally declared disaster zones under the Stafford Act, which are usually countywide, would also get a priority. And then there is a first come, first served component that is mixed into this, that we have to essentially sort these projects first in their priority groups, and then within the priorities, applications that were received first, and that's how the order of allocations is determined. And if it's clear as mud, mission accomplished. So, and one thing to keep in mind, all of this that we do is just to give an allocation. That's not even the credit. Then you still have to do your project, complete your federal approval processes, and then it's not even a set aside. It's a promise of a credit. It's a make, right? Because you still have to do all of the things. Right, exactly. And the only way to take care of this is to not have allocation limits, is to have an open program, and Illinois is not ready for that for budgetary reasons. We do have such open-ended programs in very specific areas. That's that River Edge historic tax credits that I had crossed out. So those communities, of which there now are 16, have that uncapped state historic tax credit with, you know, if they qualify for the federal credit and if they're in that proper designated zone, they also get a 25% state tax credit, no questions asked. So see if we can get Lebanon designated a River Edge. We got a river somewhere up here?
Silver Creek.
Perfect. Get on it.
2 weeks ago, we had a river.
Okay, should have applied. So, and interestingly enough, more towns are getting added each year because of this incentive. Like we just had Alton and Sterling get added to the program. And the year before that, we had like 9 communities. So, Quincy and LaSalle, Peru, East Moline, Rock Island, Joliet, Kankakee. Yeah.
You drove right by the river.
Pardon? There's also a 3-part application process to get this credit. It starts with a virtual online workshop, and that workshop is on August 20th. So projects that want to apply are required to attend, but anybody can attend. So if you really want to, you know, you think you're falling asleep now, if you really want to take a nap, I encourage you to join that WebEx webinar, and I will cover this ad nauseum. So, but we've had this program since 2019, and we did get an increase. We started with 15 million a year. It's been increased to 25. So we've been able to allocate a little bit more to 45 projects in 18 communities, over $1 billion. That represents over $1 billion in private expenditures. And the projects range in size, from small, like this little Carnegie Library in Toledo, to the Cook County Hospital, which was $150 million. So. So here are the dates for that workshop. Again, August 20th. I'll have links at the end. So, and if you send me an email, I'm happy to direct you to that. You don't have to sign up. You can decide that day that you want to participate. And again, this program dovetails with the federal credit, so there is no reason for us to kind of repeat the steps just to figure out whether you can get a state tax credit allocation. And you're not actually required to claim the federal credit to apply for the state. You just have to apply for the federal credit. You don't have to claim it if you get it. I don't know why you wouldn't, but again, everybody's financial sort of situations are different. Well, that completes the commercial property incentive discussion. Any questions about the state tax credit? Sure.
Does it matter how the ownership is established as far as like if it's a sole prop or an S corp or an individual, anything change there?
It may, so not in terms of the general availability of the credit, but how it's set up will determine who the tax credits flow through.
Yeah.
So if you have an LLC with a development partnership agreement, it would specify the percentages of ownership, and it's in those percentages that the credit's gonna flow through. The one thing that's cool about our program that we've been able to change is you could have a disproportionate allocation between the federal and state. So you could actually have different investors for the federal credit and different ones for the state.
Okay.
So, just because I'm getting 99% of the federal doesn't mean I need to get 99% of the state. I could get 1% of the state and vice versa. So there's ability to set it up independently, whereas historically it needed to match. You were bound by your federal sort of allocation process.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. So, property tax assessment freeze. This is for owner-occupied residential properties. It's not a tax abatement. What is the benefit? It freezes your assessed valuation and therefore your taxes associated with assessed value for a period of 8 years after you get your project approved, after you finish it. And then additional 4 years of gradual step-ups. So we have a little example here. If your property is worth 400,000 now and then 500 after the rehab, it would be frozen for 8 years at 400 and then gradually increase until in year 12 it would hit its then current market value. And if you're quick at math, you just realize that it's actually not a 12-year freeze, but 11, because at year 12 you are then at your level. So 11 years of reduced taxes. The criteria are very similar. It's for historic buildings. They have to be owner occupied. They have to meet those standards. And then the expenditure threshold, the calculus there is slightly different. So let's talk about that. Each of those. So again, for historic buildings for the freeze, it's the same ones we already talked about. So individual National Register properties or contributing buildings within National Register districts, or locally designated landmarks and contributing buildings within locally landmarked districts whose ordinances have been approved by our Office for the Freeze. And Lebanon's hasn't been. I don't know if you have a local preservation ordinance, but that's something that could be established. And all you need to do is ask us to approve your ordinance for that purpose if you decide to do that in the future. But as it stands, you're the same 186 contributing buildings in your current district would qualify for the freeze if they are owner occupied residential. So again, this is the post rehab use. So you could take a former commercial property or some other type, you say church, we've had church, keep mentioning churches because they're neither residential or commercial. But we've had them rehabbed as both. So there's a church in Bloomington that somebody rehabbed as their primary residence, and they got the freeze for it. So buildings up to 6 rental units, as long as the owner resides in one of them and it's his or her primary residence. Condominiums and co-ops also qualify. So the budgetary test is different from the credit. You have to exceed 25% of the assessor's fair cash or fair market value. So this isn't the value that, you know, you would find on Zillow necessarily. It's what the assessor determines annually is your value. And typically it's fair market value, assessor's fair market value is 3 times the assessed value. In Cook County, it's 10 times. But that's the only difference. And again, you can just look at your tax bill to figure out what that is. So if you spend a quarter of that amount in a period of 24 months, which can be extended to 48 months, then you would satisfy that financial requirement. The other difference between this and the credit is that any work on the property qualifies to meeting that threshold. So constructing a new addition or a new building or a new garage is an improvement to the property, and therefore it qualifies. And likewise, similar depreciable soft costs, architectural fees, things like that would also be eligible. And so this one is what the credit is, right? The more you spend, the more credit you get. With this, once you just have to spend $1 more than that threshold, and then the incentive is the same. You can continue to spend more money. And realistically, your benefit will be larger because without the freeze, the more you spend, the more your property will, higher will be reassessed, right? But you don't get, it's not disproportionately lowered. You always know what that value will be. It's pre-rehab value, right? The goal is to keep it at that after your building's rehabbed. And then we already talked about the standards. It's those same rehabilitation standards that we use to review everything. We review exterior and interior spaces. And we do have to review everything. So for example, you can't just say, well, I just need you to look at the exterior and we're gonna meet our threshold on exterior. But we want to do what we want to do on the inside of the building. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. We have to review all of the work, regardless of whether it qualifies for the credit or for the tax freeze, because all work impacts the historic character of the building. So that's a common misconception, and it's usually driven by the fact that local design review is typically limited to exterior of buildings. So we actually have quite a few projects that apply for this. And, you know, they walk in with their, I was already approved by so-and-so local preservation commission. That's fantastic. Their review isn't a substitute for ours. And also, what did you do on the inside of the building, right? Because they didn't review that. And so, unfortunately, that sometimes means people can't achieve their incentive because they didn't know about us, and the work that they've done on the inside, or they've assumed that we don't care about interiors without contacting us, and they got a new building, and there was stuff that should have been saved. So
So that's
was
gonna
unfortunate.
exceed the overall value?
Pardon?
Can it exceed the overall value, the original value?
No, this is not a financial calculation. This is just in terms of retaining the historic character.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
If there is stuff there that should have been retained, and you demolished it, then probably not gonna be able to approve your project. Another three-part application, all in threes, because, you know, once somebody came up with a three-part application, everybody else just continued with it. And it's very similar. Part one, is it historic? Part two, what is it now? What are you gonna do to it? And then part three, show us what you've done. And then with the freeze, you actually do have to provide proof of expenses. So, and those are, they vary. I mean, we've gotten like binders full of receipts before. I really don't enjoy looking through those. You know, if you hired a contractor, if he can give you a clean bill and, you know, paid in full at the end, that would be great, you know, with the final amount. But, you know, it's whatever proof you have, canceled checks, credit card bills, you know, to prove that you've spent enough, we'll review it. So, and we used to do site visits for freezes, but we due to workload, have been unable to do so. So we figured out, and actually because of COVID, a lot of our previously paper applications went paperless and electronic, and we've also determined that we don't need to see tax freeze projects, or most of them, and are able to review the project digitally. So, so it's best to contact us before you do the work. Again, we want you to succeed in securing the incentive, but it's not required. You can, what is required is that you contact us at least within 2 years of completing a project. So, and literally contacting us is sufficient. Just send an email that sort of stops the clock. But if it's been more than 2 years ago, we can't review it. The statute prohibits it. And so here in this program, flipping the property with the incentive is something that happens quite often. So, and we see that in, you know, sort of gentrified neighborhoods where there's a lot of interest in historic properties. A developer will come in, rehab the property, work with us, and then not submit that last part of the application because freeze goes to the owner. They're not the owner, but they're not the owner that's going to live in the house. And then they sell the property with the incentive. So this is then what elevates you over another property, right? Especially in markets that are hot and where there are lots of similar properties to choose from. And then that new owner that buys the property submits that last piece of the application, and then we issue the freeze to them. And when I say we issue a piece of paper to the assessor, and the assessor puts the freeze on the property. So this is a partnership with county assessors. Okay, 45 minutes, and just a few tips. Then you can stay around for questions as long as you have them. So just a few quick standards related tips. Don't replace your windows before you talk to us. If you had historic windows and you put in windows like that, I would hope that you understand why I would have to tell you that your project does not qualify. If you don't understand why, we'll talk after, okay? Don't gut the building before you talk to us. Again, maybe there's nothing there that we would care about, but on the off chance that there is, if you got a historic interior, then that's going to preclude your ability to claim the incentive. This is a big one. And it's directly tied to the rehabilitation standards. Standard 4, we call it the change over time standard, which is different from restoration. It acknowledges that properties change over time, and certain changes to properties can actually acquire their own significance, or could become even more significant than the property's original historic character. So in this example, we have an 1870s building with a 1930s storefront. that storefront is historic. It's not original to the building, but it is historic. So under our programs, it would have to be retained rather than reconstructing a new version, some faux version of a storefront that we may think may have been there and can vaguely picture it, you know what I mean? We work with what is historic at the property now. Now, if you don't have a historic storefront, or there are multiple of documented historic storefronts, let's say this wasn't there, but we knew what the original looked like and we knew what this one looked like, then you could choose. I want to put in a historic storefront. And so you could do either, because we know that what either of them look like, and we know that both are appropriate to this building. And so you have some choice that way. If we don't know what it looked like, then we just sort of try to picture what might be compatible, you know, typical 19th century storefronts, large display windows, transoms, center entry, you know, lots of glass, right? And people don't want that nowadays. For various reasons, efficiency or no retail space on the ground floor, whatever the case may be. But that's the type of look we would guide you to. But in different eras of architecture, which are becoming historic, like mid-20th century modernism, maybe sort of smaller punched window openings and different architectural character and expression can also be appropriate. So it just depends on your building. And having a very rigid kind of approach, you know, I always wanted this kind of building, then pick a different building to rehab. Don't try to force this onto this poor building, you know? Or do whatever you want because you're the owner and you can. But if you want the incentive, then you will need to follow these rules. So this is sometimes difficult for people to understand that a subsequent change should be retained because it's not original. So basically, when dealing with us, let's not even use the word original, just use the word historic. Is it historic? Doesn't matter if it's original. Is it historic? That's what we care about. And then this one, it's a terrible slide, but the point of this is to encourage you to talk to us and submit the applications before you do the work. Again, it's not required. But what these slides try to demonstrate is in this project in a town that shall be unnamed, but is not that far from here. This owner, before talking with us, before submitting an application, replaced his historic windows. Now, fortunately, we agreed that he was able to document that the windows were deteriorated and in fact required replacement. Unfortunately, the windows that he put in were terrible, just absolutely not compatible with the historic character of the building. And believe it or not, the project he was doing enough other work in the building and the credit was worth it that he replaced his brand new windows with windows that we would approve so that he could get the credit. And all of that could have been avoided and saved. It was just unnecessary expense that ate into his credit, right? But it was such an important incentive that he did that. So I want to see that expense, that torture. Because that's what it felt like. And so if you think you're gonna do anything, just let us know. You're not beholden to following through. You can walk away at any point. But even before submitting an application, we can have a preliminary discussion that hopefully can steal you down the path, at least keep your options open. You can always decide, you know, this isn't for me, or I want to do what I want to do. This is not really a good incentive. That's great. More power to you. But what I hate to do is see people at the end just be so disenchanted and just not be able to achieve what was within their grasp. Rather easily avoidable. I'm not an accountant. I can't help you to figure out whether the credit is for you, whether you make enough money or not enough money, or whether partner A or B will get more credit, and how to set up a LLC. This is not what I do. So your accountant will be able to help you with that or steer you in the right direction. And here's my contact info. I have cards. These are the web links to take you to the various pages on our website: general incentives, the federal credit, state credit, and the tax freeze. So the new mayor has a copy of that presentation. So I can also email it to any of you if you want it. So that's it. You survived under an hour, so.
You're still gonna answer questions?
And I can answer questions, but then we're having dinner at your. So.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, all of it. We're having peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
You'll take it.
So any questions?
Sorry, I walked in. I didn't know.
No, that's
I
okay.
may have covered this already. You're saying exterior and interior. Now, interior, does that include basements and attics?
Yes.
Okay, so,
Which program? Freeze?
no, I'm part of the mermaid house.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
There- That's where we already have the section the 707 completed.
So
and
that's
it
not
was
even tax
determined-
credit either, because that's.
Right, it was determined that you don't really care what we do in the basement because it's not.
okay. Outside then. Have they came over and looked at the outside? I don't know. I know they were going to.
I think there's another person in our office that's specifically reviewing your project or.
It's already done.
Yeah.
The review.
The review is done for the outside.
The review is done for our project. That's where I sent it to you about 6 weeks ago. At this point. That's where we're trying to get the grant
Mhm.
application actually submitted, but
Sure.
DCEO has a copy of the SHPO's approval letter.
Okay. Yeah, Anthony Rubat.
Yes.
Is your reviewer, right?
Yes. Chatted with him on the phone very extremely.
Yes, good.
I have another question.
Sure.
You talked a lot about like if you gut a building, how it kind of derails a lot of things. What about some of our buildings uptown that somebody has already done a lot of work inside and taken some of those things out? Does that automatically make like those properties wouldn't be eligible now? Or
No.
is there something we can do?
Again, so remember I said you're not beholden by choices made by previous owners. So our starting point is the way the building is now. So only you are responsible for the choices you make moving forward
From we don't require.
from when you acquired it. Now, if you've owned it a long time ago, let's say you did some of that work, but 10 years
Keep
ago.
selling back later and be like,
Yeah.
I made that mistake, and I'd like help with it. Okay.
But we have had projects that people have owned it for a long time and they have done something to it 10, 20 years ago. That's in the past. I think, I don't know what that cutoff is. It's generally, if you have a project now, you might need to demonstrate that that project isn't connected to your other projects. So did you plan on doing what you're doing now when you were doing that work that you weren't supposed to? And the way we determine that is like, well, did you apply for a permit? What did those plans look like? You know, it's rare most people aren't playing games. So, and if they did something, it was long ago, and they didn't know, or they had no idea that there were programs available. So usually it's very easy to separate past projects from current ones. So,
Thank you.
sure. Yes,
Do you have a cutoff year to determine something that's being restored? Do you have a
definite year?
So for current listings, so for the current historic district. I don't know it off the top of my head, but based on the 1978 nomination, it's likely 50 years prior to that.
50 years.
And that's generally 50 years is a rule, if we're, I should say, a guide, not a rule. There are, because in order to be historic, you have to be significant and old enough. But we also know that certain things that aren't quite 50 years old or older are historic. They're just that significant. So that's why 50 years it's just sort of a benchmark. But you can start thinking about it prior to that. So if you're thinking of designating something new, think of properties between 40 and 50 years that may become historic at some point, or maybe even are historic now. If it's something that's already listed in the historic district, then we go to the document and it'll tell us what's already is historic and what isn't. And there is if not a specific cutoff date, then it's implied. And it depends on when you created the historic district, which is why I need to put you on the spot. But sometimes updating really old district is of use because it brings up that cutoff date. So let's say it was 50 years in 1978, which means the cutoff would have been 28. And if we do an update in 2025, now the cutoff is 1975. So there's 40 plus years of properties that may not have been considered historic, like your house, which was probably one of the reasons why it was excluded from the district, was 39, right? So, now could be pulled into the district, or if they are already in the district, could become contributing, could become historic, because they've acquired that significance in the meantime. Yes.
This is more a real fast clarification on the prior answer there, is that we were doing SHPO coordination because of our use of state money, not because we were applying for any of these programs.
Yeah, because you don't qualify for this.
Yeah.
But you do, but as explained in the beginning, it's the use of state or federal funds, licensing or permitting that then brings us in. Any other questions? And if you think of them later tonight, feel free to call me. I won't answer tonight, but
You'll be around.
that's right. Or send me an email. And again, if you decide you want to do a project in the future, happy to come back and visit your property then. It's a beautiful, you live in a beautiful town, beautiful historic town, so
Yeah.
I don't need too many excuses to visit you, so let's put it that way.
Well, give him a round of applause for showing up.
Not for doing the work, just for showing up.
Yeah, that's it.